You are welcome to turn on your video if you want to, so that we can see your face. And certainly if you want to ask a question or make a comment, one way to let me know that would be to turn your video on. You can also, there's a hand raise function, I think, for most of you, said you could indicate that you wanted to join the conversation that way. We will be going back and forth between sort of framing material and exercises for you to do. They would be more fun, I confess, if we were together and we could do these in small groups. We don't have the technical capacity to load extra breakout groups on top of the breakout group we're already in. So I'm going to ask you to think about these things on your own and to make some notes, but also please feel free to share comments or questions or insights or surprises with the group based on the reflection that you are doing. Let's see, other technical things. Do keep your microphone muted otherwise if you're not speaking, because they are recording these sessions, and I understand that that makes for a lot of background noise and messes up the recording. So welcome everyone. I am sorry not to be present with you face to face like all of you, I'm sure. I'm tired of the semi-house arrest that we're all operating under, but we are making the best of the situation, and I'm glad that we can converse at least in this technically mediated fashion. Okay, so to begin, people are still joining us, so I'm killing a second, but to begin, and these are self-contained enough that if people join late, I think it will still make sense. I want to talk initially about the nature of discernment, the work of trying to see when seeing is not clear and obvious, but requires seeing around corners or through obstacles or through features that obscure our vision. For those of us who have spent much of our adult lives in school of one kind or another, we tend to think of discernment as chiefly an intellectual task, a kind of thinking in which we are seeking to know, and that what we do if we are uncertain, what we need to do is to think harder. I want to suggest that discernment is in truth a combination of intellectual work, yes, but also emotional and spiritual work, where spiritual is very broadly construed. According to Paul Tillich, religion is anything that has to do with matters of ultimate concern. So I'm going to suggest that discernment of a calling in your life and a life path for yourself, whether that's shifting to a new path in the middle of your working life, or starting out in that very strange interval between the end of formal schooling and the beginning of, as we say, grown-up life, when you're launching upon your first working life, wherever you are along that trajectory. The work of discernment asks you to think, but also to remember, to feel, and to imagine. And so we will be doing some exercises going back and forth where I will ask you questions and give you time to actually reflect. And my advice is that you make some notes for yourself, just as a way to organize and retain some of what you've thought about. But of course, how you work best and how you think best is best known to you. So discernment then, as a task, has three basic directions. It turns us inward as we investigate ourselves, our gifts, our limits and passions. It turns outward, asking about the world we inhabit, its needs and opportunities. And it turns upward, so to speak, to the causes or purposes or persons we most prize and to which we are most devoted, what people of faith would name a calling. We often think of that language as pertaining only to religious or spiritual activities, like a calling to the priesthood or something. But in fact, one of the great gifts of Protestant thought is the realization that any task which is of use in the world, which benefits some creature, is an opportunity to serve the world. and can be received as a gift and offered as a gift, and rightly deserves to be called a calling. If we find the life we were meant for, if we find the work we were made to do, whether that's playing the French horn or making shoes, really good shoes, we can call that and think of that as a gift we receive and a gift that we offer. So with that very broad construal of what we're doing, let's talk about and ask the questions related to the process of discernment. What I will do is put on the screen a slide with questions for you to think about and give you actually a few minutes, which will seem very long, although in truth it's about 4 to 8 minutes each, to think about your own answers to those questions. And as I said, make notes for yourself or don't, but just take time to actually ask yourself these questions and to remember and to imagine and to pay attention to what you know about yourself and how you know it. So to start with, I said we would turn inward to discern our own gifts. How do we know what our gifts are? I'm sorry, I have to find my way out long enough to get the screen I want to share. Here we are. I apologize for the delay. Technical navigations are not at all one of my gifts. So it's going to take me a second to find my way in. Here we go. All right, now I can go back to you all and do screen sharing. Have I successfully given you a slide? I am screen sharing. Okay, great. So our first slide is the beginning of the work of saying, what are your gifts? Based on your experience in school, at work, or in other avocations you have pursued, from the feedback of others whom you trust, your most important teachers or mentors or leaders over the years. And then thirdly, from the people who know you best. What did they count on you for? What did they turn to you for? Often we learn most about ourselves from others. Self-reflection is wonderful, but others see us differently than we see ourselves. Things we take for granted and may not think of as gifts may be received by others as real gifts to them and to the world. So take a few minutes and think, what do you know about your own gifts? As important as knowing what you are best at is being aware of your own limits, either things that you are less talented at. No one who knows me would ask me to do math, but perhaps things you can do, but find draining or aversive or exasperating. When we're talking about finding a path for our lives in work or finding a new way forward, it's important to think for the long term. Now, of course, any kind of work has aspects which are not your favorite thing in life. But if you commit yourself to a kind of work which constantly draws upon things you may be competent at, but do not enjoy, that in the long run drains your life of joy. It also makes you less pleasant to be around, and most of the time less effective in your work. So knowing what not to commit yourself to in work is as important as knowing what you excel at. So think about, honestly, from drawing on all your own experience and all the insights of others, think about the limits that also shape your discernment about your path. Beyond recognizing your own gifts and your limits, think for a moment about the passions that move you, the activities that give you joy, that engage you most fully. What are the tasks? What are the kinds of work and activity that use the abilities that you have, but are also the ones that are most native and natural to you? The ones whose exercise gives you a sense of satisfaction and well-being. Having begun by looking inward to who we are, to what we have to offer, to what excites our sense of delight and engagement and satisfaction, we now turn outward to the world we inhabit. What do you see amid all the pressing issues that surround us? What do you see as the most critical needs and the most valuable opportunities that are presented by the world we share? The issues are abundant, not only the pandemic that's presently grips so much of our attention and occupies so much of our practical intelligence as we try to figure out how to sustain the world while containing and sustaining a gathered willingness to contain this illness and its consequences. Apart from that, which we are all staring in the face, the issues are diverse and span everything from technical challenges. How can we develop and implement sustainable energy? How can we develop and provide sustainable food sources? To political issues. How can we sustain any measure of freedom and well-being when fundamental trust is so deeply eroded, not only between nations, but within them? To the practical struggle to manage a globalized economy. What are the structures that will enable efficient and fair production and distribution of all the needed goods in the world? The list goes on and engages every kind of issue, from communication to artistic production to the sustenance of culture to the harmonization of differences to finding an alternative to the devastations of the wars that percolate all around the world all the time. In every imaginable arena of human life, there are issues and problems that present themselves, but also perhaps opportunities for intelligence, for practical acuity, for emotional resources, for all the gifts human beings can bring to the world to be of service, to be of help. What, as you look at this ongoing list, here is the focused question. What task is it that calls out to you as the way to use your gifts and passions, the thing you want to devote your limited time and energy to? I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. And the focus is on what is it that calls out to you as the aspect of the world's needs and opportunities you are wanting to pour your time into. One more minute. Remember that you are invited to have a more active role and to share insights you are gaining or surprises as you reflect. I actually think, especially for people who've spent so much of their lives in school, that they are rarely called upon to think very much about what they enjoy or to reflect upon the activities that draw them in most richly and fully. We structure our school lives mostly in terms of other people's ideas of what we need to know and to do, and requirements that other people ask us to fulfill. And as somebody who does her share of imposing such obligations, they have their place. But they can leave you at the age of 25 or 30 with a well-developed set of skills for doing what other people think you need, without, though, a very good sense of what you need, of what fills you with a sense of satisfaction and delight. So if you are moved to share any surprises, any insights, or any questions you think it might be of help to others to pursue, please feel free either to unmute your mic and talk to us, or to turn on your screen mic and share in the conversation, or to use the chat function to send your thoughts on to other participants. Along with asking you to look inward to your own gifts and limits and outward to the world whose needs and opportunities call out to you, I want to stop and talk a little bit about the character of motivation. Motivation is not what we aim to do, which is intention, technically, but rather why. What it is that moves us to be engaged in an activity, or to pursue a goal, or devote our time and energy to some kind of work. Motivation can be of three different general kinds. We can be moved from behind, as when we are moved by fear away from what is threatening or intolerable to us. For instance, the assumption of classical economics is that all of us are moved by the fear of scarcity, moved to labor and to accumulation by the fear of lack. We are, as embodied and vulnerable beings, intensely needy. And so the sense of the fear of our needs going unfulfilled is a primary motivation and driver for human beings. We are also, especially in a highly developed consumer economy like ours, we are moved from the side, so to speak, when we are moved by what others have or do or want, that stirs us to imitation. Before you decide that this does not apply to you, that it is not what others have or do that moves you, I remind you that this imitation is the whole basis of advertising, where we are baldly told, be the envy of your neighbors, a very direct appeal to our desire to excite admiration by what we possess, by what we wear, by what we own, by where we live, and so on and so forth. And advertising is far too expensive to be continued if it does not work. Thus, this appeal to a created desire works on all of us to some extent. Philosopher René Girard speaks of mimetic desire, desire that is inspired by imitation, a created desire. And if you talk to an advertising executive or reading an advertising textbook, you know that advertisers speak quite directly about the aim of advertising, not as the provision of product information, but rather as the creation of desire. The third general kind of motivation moves us not from behind by what we flee or from the side by what we imitate. It is the kind of motivation that moves us from before us. It is the kind of motivation that moves us by what we love, by what we are drawn to. And in classical philosophy, and in the theologies that are predicated upon it, this is the deepest and most constructive kind of motivation that draws us to what we love, so that the most critical feature of character, the most decisive aspect of who we are and who we will become in our lives, is the character of what we love. What we love is the thing for which we will face and endure what we fear, the thing for which we will sacrifice what others tell us we should want or have. We will do this in order to be present to and to care for this person or this cause or this goal. Philosopher and theologian Søren Kierkegaard asserts, purity of heart is to will one thing. Because the person who is wholly devoted to a central object of love cannot be cowed or deflected. Long study and a fair amount of experience convinced me that having a life worth living is having a life that is not centered and moved by fear or by imitation, but is a life impelled and nourished by love. So asking then what it is that draws us forward by love, which can be hard to get at directly. It's surprisingly hard to ask yourself and honestly to answer, what do you most love? So I'm going to invite you into an exercise that is a kind of remembrance. I want to invite you to take a few minutes to remember as deeply and in as vivid detail as you can manage, to remember a time in your life when you were most contented, most fulfilled, most at home in yourself and in your life. And I want to ask you to think about, what was it in that time that moved you? What was the motive that started and sustained your activity? So to prompt that reflection, here's another slide to look at. Take a few moments and remember as deeply as you can when you were at home in your life. And ask yourself, what was the motivation that moved and sustained you in that time? 1 minute. I want to suggest that one of the signs that you have found your calling in this very, very broad sense, in which any useful activity can be a calling, is when we find the work that uses and stretches and engages the greatest breadth of our abilities, the one activity that takes up the largest proportion of who you are and the gifts you have to give, and that absorbs those gifts in the activity, uses and extends them. One of the signs that we've found this place is that when engaged in this work, you lose track of time. You are given the enormous gift of self-forgetfulness. Not that you are gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to do what you ought to. Not that you are engaging in relentless, highly disciplined self-denial, turning from what you want to do and be to what you ought to do. But rather that time when you are just so engaged in, so deeply drawn into the activity that you lose track of time, or that you defer some mundane activity like, I don't know, eating or going to bed, because you are wholly taken up in what you are doing. Philosopher Iris Murdoch talks about the fat, relentless ego, the pressing attention to our own needs and interests that centers our consciousness and constantly draws us into that self-absorbed self, where you are the center of your own awareness. That work that engages us fully, that takes our gifts and sets them to a purpose that seems to us inherently worthwhile, inherently good, and deserves our attention and devotion. It can give us that wonderful gift of losing that self-absorption for a time, being taken up into our life and given into the world, so that the voice of self is hushed for a moment. And I want to suggest that those times are clues for all of us to the work that we were meant to do. You all, I suspect, have this experience when you are doing something and lose track of other things, when you are so taken up in the student you're working with, the friend in trouble you are listening to, whatever it is you do, that you are wholly present to that task and lose the nagging list of other things to do or other needs or all the other things that distract us from our work. When I work with people and listen to people who have found what they would call their life's calling, there are a few things I hear again and again. People tell me, this doesn't feel like work. I'm embarrassed to get a paycheck for this. This feels like play or just being myself or just living my life. Or the people who are engaged in deeply demanding and challenging work. I'm thinking of a hospital chaplain I know who spent a whole night sitting by the bed of a homeless man who had fallen onto high voltage electrical wires and whom they could not save, but she was determined simply that he not die alone. And she talked about her sense of privilege in that work. And I remember thinking at the time that this person had found her calling, that she knew what she was in the world to do. So I invite you to do something you're hardly ever asked to do in an official way. I invite you to remember and to daydream. Remember your own times of deepest engagement and daydream. Imagine a time and a place in which you are busy and useful, employing what you regard as your best gifts to pursue goals or purposes that you are sure are worthwhile. Imagine that time and place and activity. And I'm going to invite you, but of course not require you, but invite you to share what your imagination brings you to. What is it you are doing? I will post a screen with this question for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I will invite any of you who are willing to share what was going on in your imagined activity. All right. Let me invite anyone who is willing to share their imagined future in which they are doing what they were made to do. You can turn on your video camera, or you can simply unmute and share orally, or if you want, you can type it in chat to everybody and we'll read it there. I bet you're not this quiet in face-to-face classes. All right, we are down to our last minute, and I'm supposed to tell you to return to the main session through the link you have in your email for a brief wrap-up before the entire day's work ends at 5 o'clock. Oh, I just got a note from one of you. We all got a note saying solving puzzles. There are so many avenues of work in which solving puzzles is what you do, although I think it depends to some extent on what kind of puzzles you enjoy solving. I know somebody who does logistics for a living, and I'm pretty sure it would drive me out of my mind, but he's crazy about it. Michael has written to us. Oh, Michael, yes. If you can help people see into the nature of conflict and find a way through it. I have a friend who works in something that he calls conflict transformation as opposed to conflict resolution, that I think has to do with your insight, that seeing into the nature of what creates conflict might help us to guide us to what connects us. Thank you all for sharing. Thanks for your attention. I hope you find the questions at least provocative for your reflection and that the day's work together was of use to you. Enjoy the rest of your time together. Bye-bye.